Hello, BookTube. Just recently, I was watching Peg, the Book Prize addict, as all right-thinking booktubers do, and she did a video on the Desmond Elliott Prize for fiction, which the long list was just announced. 10 books for the Desmond Elliott Prize for fiction, which is, I think, a dozen years old or so, and deep-pocketed. It's a £10,000 award for the winner. And the prize was named after Desmond Elliott, a man who came from nothing, and never ceased telling people that, and eventually managed to get an education and enter the publishing world. First as a factotum, and that didn't work because he was not of the personality that was ever going to be that for very long. And then he struck out on his own as a publisher and also as a literary truffle sniffer out in the woods, finding people that he thought would have prosperous careers inside them. And he had amazing instincts for that. And eventually became a kind of Hollywood version of what he considered to be a successful 1930s publisher. He had a pronounced theatrical predilection for the finer things in life, the so-called finer things in life, the escargot, the silk shirts, all that sort of stuff. But his literary instincts never actually made it all the way to the better part of town. He had a good ear for literary quality, but he also had a very good ear for the fizz and pop of pure entertainment. And as a result, quite a few of the authors that eventually entered the stable of his favorites, people whose careers he either helped or created, are authors that no one would ever consider literary in the air quotes italicized way that literary has now attached itself to the term literary fiction. There are quite a few Desmond Elliott authors who loved him dearly. Of course, they all loved him dearly. He was a snob in the grating way that only people born poor can be. But he was also incredibly generous and funny. And I know some of these things. I know most of these things secondhand by people who knew him. I only had one encounter with him myself. Peg, in her video, actually compares him to me. That is the first, and I bet the only time that will ever happen. He was absolutely nothing like me, except maybe I'm not the person to say that. Certainly, I wouldn't be able to pick a silk shirt out of a police lineup. But I had one encounter with him a long time ago, long before most of you were born, when I wrote a review savaging one of his authors. I didn't know it was one of his authors at the time. I savaged her latest book, and got a tart letter from him. Somehow he had come across my review. I got a tart letter from him, sort of calling me on the carpet for how dare you and all that sort of thing. And those of you who've been watching my channel for a while won't probably be surprised when I tell you that then, as now, I was not prone to taking tart letters in silence. So I fired off an equally tart response, and this led to a response from him. And I think I wrote one more. I'm pretty sure I had the final word, but I think it was probably just because he thought, this colonial isn't worth bothering. But that was it. I never met him. I only met and corresponded with and had phone calls with people who dealt with him, and it was universal love. I never talked to an author that didn't love him. But naturally, when he endowed his literary prize, he endowed it for, all the high-sounding stuff, great and complex work, breadth and depth, I think was the phrase that has worked its way into the Desmond Elliott Award description. I myself don't think that Desmond Elliott would have recognized depth in a work of literature if it had come with a name tag attached to it that said, "Hello, my name is Depth in a literary novel." But I could be wrong, and I don't want to malign the dead one way or another. If you knew nothing about the Desmond Elliott Prize except this particular year's long list, you could probably accurately guess what Desmond Elliott's own reading tastes were like, which is a good thing and a bad thing. So I wanted to go through the list and we can sort of talk about it. I've read most of the books on the list. I want to show you this. I'm hoping that the yoga book will behave itself. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So we're going to go through these. There are 10 books on this list. So let's do this first one. The first one, I don't how big I can get it. It's Sally. Oh God, it's oh my. Oh, it's Sally Rooney. Conversations with Friends. And it's bad. It's boring. It's a bunch of brittle, unbelievable people saying and doing brittle, unbelievable things to each other. I can't imagine the type of reader who would like it, but that I'm sure that it has some. I'm sure that the people who nominated it for this award actually did like it. But one thing I can tell you for sure, Desmond Elliott wouldn't have liked it. he would have thought, okay, there's no meat on the bone. There's nothing happening here. But this next one, he was big on gimmicks. He was a popular reader. He was what we would consider a middle-brow reader. And quite a few of the books on this list, knowingly or not, they weren't, of course, picked by him. He's been dead for a long time. But quite a few of the books on this list live and die by gimmicks. And I myself am always distrustful of that, especially in a debut novel. Somehow or another, I always expect debut novels to be just breathing fire and breaking new ground and telling all the old established talents, your day is done. It's never true, but I like that fire in debut writers. And so when a debut writer goes in their first work straight to a gimmick, I worry that what we're seeing is the beginning not of a promising literary career, but of a lazy literary career. And we have, God knows, enough of those. But the next one, appropriately enough here, is One Star Awake by Andrew Mian, which is an amnesia novel about a young woman who doesn't remember anything about her past and slowly comes to, with the help of a guy, and it's the again, it's not well done. It's a debut novel that looks, sounds, feels, acts exactly like a debut novel, and that's unfortunate because in order to overcome the cliche of amnesia, you really have to work extra hard. And the odd thing about literary cliches is that people who do them will fall on one or on one side or the other of a drastic conception of a literary cliche. They won't put people who do them will either put it in there in order to explode it out of the ground, which is great, always lots of fun, or they'll put it in there as though to say, well, I'm a writer, these are my birthright. You can't call me on these things. And this is a particular cliche novel that does the latter, and that's unfortunate. It has a lot of strong writing in it. But this next one I haven't read. This is How Saints Die by Carmen Marcus. I'm sorry, my visuals are not nearly as good as they were an hour ago, but that's all right. But I haven't read it. But its plot description, it's a coming of age novel about a young girl who spends time with picaresque and unreal adults on the coast of England. So, I mean, I don't think it's published in America yet. When I get a copy, I will certainly read it. But again, outre stuff like that, stuff that has no relationship to any part of the observable world whatsoever, always makes me suspicious. It makes me wonder if that same author could put two characters at a kitchen table with nothing happening but conversation and write 10 pages that you cannot stop reading. And if you can't, I'm not just picking on debut novelists here. If your craft is fiction, and you can't take two characters that your reader knows nothing about, put them at a kitchen table with nothing else happening, and keep that reader's enrapt interest for 10 pages, then you have no business having fiction be your craft. And I always worry. I think we have, in the literary world, I'm sure that names will come to your mind, plenty of names come to my mind, of authors who I don't believe have ever passed that simple test, and plenty of authors who I don't believe could pass it. That bugs me. This next one I have not only read but reviewed. I'll try to remember. This is Lucy Hughes Hallett. Peculiar Ground is the name of it. The visuals here are just terrible. Sorry. And this is a historical novel set in two different periods, in the 1660s and in the 1960s. And it opens in the historical period. A post-Restoration England. Royalists are coming back to their estates. They're trying to pick up the pieces of the world that was torn apart by a revolution, and that part of the novel is set on an ornate country estate that is being built and perfected by its owner and a visionary landscape artist. And then, after you get a sort of a plot arc of that section, the book then breaks and moves to the 20th century. In which the estate is, very old now and has a life of its own and is populated by these, in part by the champagne-popping landed aristocracy and quite a bit of fire, to me anyway. I've only read this once. I just read it once, and to me, quite a bit of narrative fire goes out of the book with that second part. And also, I've been thinking about this book. I will certainly reread it. I do not understand the artistic reason why there are two parts. I don't understand why the whole book doesn't take place in the 1660s. The author seems completely at home there and not quite as at home in the 20th century. And also, I don't see... Ordinarily, if you're going to do something like that, there would be strong ideological reasons. There would be plot reasons to bind the two of them together in one book. And I looked for them. Of course, once I got over being jarred by the change, I started looking for the reasons why. And if they're there, they were buried from my sight. But both sections of the book were extremely well written. And that's a recommendation on its own. So I do recommend it. It's just I think its split nature will probably confuse more readers than just me. No, let's see here. So then we come to a couple of Desmond Elliott books. So maybe it's fitting that they're in the Desmond Elliott Prize. The first one is something that I read on a strong recommendation from a friend of mine in the UK. And I don't know if you're going to be able to see it here. Let's see if we can we improve the lighting situation at all here? 7 Days of Us is the name of it, by Francesca Hornak. And it is a novel about a quarantine house. A family, one member of the family has been exposed to an epidemic, and therefore the house and everyone in it is quarantined for a week. And I mean, think of that premise. Just think of that premise for a minute. That is hokey. That is an extremely hokey premise. It is the kind of thing that, as I often say on this channel, it's the kind of thing that happens in novels. But it never happens in real life. And, of course, everybody has buried secrets. And also, when you have a quarantine house, a large chunk of the drama is going to come from the quarantine being broken. And all of that happens, and it happens just with pacework regularity. I mean, the writing was companionable, but in terms of the terms of the prize, breadth and depth, oh please, that's not anything. That's not either in this book. It's just a book club friendly book, and that runs through this, and that runs through this prize, including the next one. The next one is also a book club friendly book, and it's one that if you've been following prize talk on BookTube, you've already seen. It's The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock, which is a mermaid story. It's a historical novel, but the owner of a merchant fleet who comes into possession of a mermaid, and there's all sorts of metafictional hijinks that go on after that, but it is cute. It is warm and rounded and cuddly and cute. It is meant not to threaten. It is meant not to... It knows that you have nice, soft, upholstered walls for the little aperture of your fiction reading, and it just wants you to be cozy inside those walls. And there is a world for such fiction. And I love such fiction. Desmond Elliott loved such fiction. Readers in general love such fiction. But I don't know, is it wrong on my part to think that it has no place in a list of literary prizes? I don't know. I guess I always associate literary prizes with literary excellence. And there's more to why something would be recommended than that. Certainly there's more to that. If you go just by what Desmond Elliott liked and didn't like, literary excellence was only one element. So maybe I can't begrudge any of these places on this list, except that the way literary prizes are used nowadays is exclusively as connotators of literary excellence. There's no such thing, except maybe in some genre awards, like the Rita Awards or whatever, where somebody would say, oh, so that award is for excellence, but of a specific kind. But if in a debut fiction award, like the Desmond Elliott Prize, being on the long list, being on the short list, and especially winning will be used by the publisher, by publicists, by word of mouth in the literary landscape as a connoter of literary excellence. And writing a safe, cozy, comfortable book, although I can sing its praises, in 2018, I've read probably 30 such books and loved a lot of them, but there's nothing excellent about them. There's nothing that's born of electricity. There's nothing that's digging at what you expect and ripping it out of you. There's nothing that's elevating or changing you, which is what I associate with literary excellence. And you might think the same would be true of this next one. On the surface, it seems it. It's How to Be Human by Paula Carcosa. And it's the story of a woman who is not happy in her life. And she's a lot less happy than she thinks she is. And one day she finds a beautiful fox just sort of standing on her lawn. And this is simplifying just a bit, but begins to communicate with that fox. And he begins to communicate with her. More importantly, he begins to communicate with a part of her that has been brewing against the unhappinesses, the little disappointments of her life for a long time. And he starts to become a signpost of that. And you might think, okay, it's woman falls in love with fox. There's nothing more cutesy suburban than that. But no, this is the real deal. It takes what could have been a very simple premise and really does it justice. And that's a deep pleasure. And then we come to this is a book that I haven't read on the list. It's by Zan Brooks. It's All the Clocks in This House. The clocks in this house all tell different times. And it's been extravagantly praised by some booktubers who I really like, but I haven't heard anything from people that I know who've read it, and I haven't got a copy myself. So I have to pass judgment. I have to pass on it until I know more. And then we come to the last two, and this next one, our penultimate book, is one that you've seen before. Peg points out that it has made the rounds. If you've watched any booktube channels, if you've watched any award booktube channels, you've already heard of this thing. It is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman, and it is awful. And I don't understand why it is on so many award long lists. I just don't. It's the story of a woman who could only exist in a novel. She is a living straw man. She is created in order to have a novel happen to her. She is a completely bland cipher of a character. There are no peaks, no pitches, no nothing. She's just a blank sheet of a character when we meet her when the book starts, not because that's the way she really wants to be, not because that's the way the events we're told about her own past would have made her, but because that's the way the author has to have her be in order to have the book happen to her. And that's cheap and lazy, but it's also disappointing. I read this book months and months and months ago, and then I read it again when I got a second copy, and I genuinely do not understand what so many people see in it. I genuinely do not. There is nothing here that speaks to anything other than a lazy author. But here it is on another long list, and it could easily win. Anyway, the last book is in the sense of literary excellence that we typically use. The last book is the best book on this list, although it has a gimmick as well. So in that sense, Desmond Elliott would still have approved. He wouldn't have read it, but he would have approved. It's Preti Taneja's book, We That Are Young. And it's an enormous novel set in India that is the kind of the usual novelistic repurposing of King Lear, Shakespeare's King Lear. And that might roll your eyes, just on the surface right there. Because how many times have we seen that? And it gets a little tiresome. I admit that, but this is so well done. It's so well done. Immensely powerful and linguistically beautiful, and also running throughout the book, something you can't say about King Lear, kind of funny. The one fugitive element of humor in King Lear, the fool, is sort of there is a fool character in We That Are Young, but the fool character is, in my opinion, the least successful character in the book, and the humor is leached out of that character and sort of scattered throughout the book, which I think works much better, because I don't know, it's a little heretical, but in Shakespeare audiences, in theater audiences, in the course of my life, I have usually been the only person in the audience who was tempted to giggle the first two acts of the play. It's the Shakespeare play, perhaps other than Coriolanus, it is the Shakespeare play least conducive to giggling. But it's so silly. It's so silly. As a play, it's so silly that I couldn't, at the beginning, when it's so overblown, it's beautifully written, don't get me wrong, this Shakespeare has a future, but it's so silly that I couldn't help but giggle here and there. I was very happy that this author, who I think, if I remember correctly, is very young. This is a very big, ambitious book that probably has been pulling at her imagination for 10 years. And I was very pleased to see that she seems to understand a bit of that. So there is a thread of humor that runs almost all the way throughout the book. And I can't recommend it highly enough. I can't wait for it to be published in America. I can't wait to see what kind of response it will get. Can't wait to see how whether or not it will catch on. I've noticed that Shakespeare pastiches tend to do well with American book critics. Maybe they feel, on a little more solid ground. I don't know, one way or another. But that is the Desmond Elliott long list. I have to thank Peg for bringing it to my attention. I don't think I would have noticed it. I mean, I've noticed the prize in the past, but I don't quite know what to make of it. I think the main point I want to make about the books on this list, the variation of the books on this list, is that when it comes to fiction, the Desmond Elliott Prize is pretty much the only place where I would legitimately expect to find a lot of the books that are on this list. I don't expect to find them on the quote-unquote purely literary long list, where they have also turned up. Eleanor Oliphant should not be turning up on serious literary prizes. The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock, these things shouldn't be there. 7 Days of Us, these are feel-good, fuzzy book club novels. They don't have any depth. They don't have any breadth. They're well done, but I don't know. Is that what we think about when we think of literary excellence? Or is that the incremental increep into literary prizes of YA? I don't know, one way or another. I know for sure that it's probably not with the Desmond Elliott Prize, because a lot of the people involved in this prize had to have known him. They have to remember the kinds of books he likes. And the kinds of books he likes could often be hokey. They could also often be dumb. They could often be just flat out enjoyable. A lot of the books on this list, even the ones I've criticized that I've read, are, although pan shallow, still very enjoyable. So on this prize, with that name on it, okay. But it makes me wonder all the more at the other literary prizes that keep cropping up with these same books on them that should be thoroughly ignored by literary prizes. They're not everybody has to have a prize. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up for now, and I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.